A black CEO steps into first class with a paid ticket and a quiet smile. Seconds later, a flight attendant blocks her path. A stranger sits in her seat. Phones lift. The cabin holds its breath. Who gets believed when the system says otherwise? Who decides who belongs? When a screen says no and a voice says not you? What happens when the calmest person in the room refuses to move? This is Dr. Camille Rutherford. Not loud, not angry, strategic, empathetic. A woman who carries proof in a leather folio and patience like an instrument. In a narrow aisle suspended above the clouds, a small insult becomes a public trial. A live stream grows. A crew doubles down. A manager calculates. A choice arrives that could cost millions. Will dignity win against convenience? Will one seat change an airline? Will silence become power in the moment it matters most? Take a breath. Watch closely. Everything you are about to see happens in plain sight. If stories like this matter to you, tap like. Share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe and stay with us as we step into part 1. The air inside the jet bridge was a strange mix of recycled air and anticipation. That smell of carpet shampoo and faint jet fuel that every frequent flyer knows. For Dr. Camille Rutherford, it was just another transition between two battles. She had spent the week in 3 cities, closing a deal in Chicago, addressing a corporate board in Dallas, then flying here to Los Angeles to meet with an investment group that could redefine an entire sector. Now she just wanted to sit in her seat, have a quiet glass of water, and lose herself in the Atlantic skyline for a few hours. Camille moved with the kind of ease you only learn after years of navigating rooms where everyone underestimates you. Her black wool suit fit perfectly, not flashy, but unmistakably tailored. The polished leather folio in her left hand wasn't just an accessory. Inside were documents worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. She wore it like armor. In her right hand was her boarding pass, seat 2C, first class, a window seat, chosen deliberately. She liked to look out when the plane tilted upward, to remind herself that ascent always required a little turbulence. As she stepped into the warm light of the first-class cabin, Camille caught the faint click of a camera phone somewhere behind her. Probably nothing, she thought. These days everyone was filming something. She glanced ahead, her eyes finding 2C, only someone was already in it. A man in his early 40s, sandy blonde hair, navy blazer open, sat there as if the seat had been molded to his frame. One leg stretched out into the aisle, his phone in one hand, an empty glass in the other. His carry-on bag sat beside him, zipper half open, a tangle of charger cables spilling out. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. His whole posture said, "This is mine." Camille slowed. She was ready to say something polite, maybe even offer to help him find his seat if there had been a mistake. That was when the flight attendant stepped in. Lauren Keating, her uniform immaculate, her hair in a perfect bun, the bright smile that had probably been in every corporate training video, except this smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ma'am," Lauren said, stepping into Camille's path, "this section is reserved for first-class passengers only." It wasn't the words. It was the tone. That warm, syrupy kind of politeness people use when they've already decided you don't belong. Camille stopped, her boarding pass still in her hand. "That's correct," she said evenly. "I am a first-class passenger. Seat 2C. Lauren's smile didn't falter. "I'm sure there's been some kind of mix-up," she said, glancing down at Camille's folio, then back up at her face. "Do you have your status card with you?" Camille lifted her boarding pass slightly. "I have my ticket." Lauren tilted her head, almost pitying. Sometimes these upgrades get entered by mistake. It happens more often than you'd think. Someone might have used your miles. Let me help you find your actual seat." Camille glanced at the man in 2C. He still hadn't looked up. He sipped the last of whatever was in his glass, set it down on the armrest, and smirked faintly. A smirk you could feel without seeing his whole face. "Chase Keating," he said lazily, finally glancing up at Camille. "Guess they double-booked. Don't worry, I got here first." The name landed like a stone. The same last name as the flight attendant. A cousin? Maybe. Family resemblance in the jawline. Camille's grip on her folio tightened. "My ticket," she said, her voice level. "Shows seat 2C. Paid in full." Lauren's smile hardened just a fraction. "Let me just confirm with the gate system," she said, already waving toward the aisle. "Noah, can you bring up the manifest for 2C? Noah Delgado appeared, tablet in hand, wearing the slightly nervous expression of someone new to the job. He scrolled, frowning. "It shows Mr. Keating checked in for 2C this morning," he said. "No other notes." Camille could feel it, the weight of every eye in that cabin beginning to turn. The first-class passengers pretending to scroll their phones while listening. The row of business-class passengers leaning just slightly forward to catch a glimpse. Lauren's tone softened, but it was the kind of softness that didn't invite comfort. "Ma'am, if you'll just step aside, we'll get you seated in your assigned place." Camille stood still. She wasn't blocking anyone. She wasn't raising her voice. But her mind was moving. She had been here before, in different forms. The time at the hotel when they told her the executive floor was full, only to hand the key to the man behind her. The time a junior associate was congratulated on her closing deal because they assumed he was the lead. The countless small cuts that come with being both visible and unseen. She thought of her father, a man who had worked 2 jobs for decades, who had taught her that dignity was not something you asked for. It was something you carried until others had no choice but to see it. From somewhere behind her came a voice. "I saw her board with first class," said a woman. Camille turned her head slightly and found the speaker an older black woman in seat 6A. Silver hair, posture straight as a ruler, ticket in hand. I think she knows where she's supposed to be. Lauren's eyes flickered, but she didn't address the woman. "Noah," she said, "we're going to need to reassign this seat." Noah hesitated. "We could check the central system," he offered. Sometimes Lauren cut him off with a glance. "Mr. Keating's check-in is confirmed." "That's final." The man in 2C leaned back, satisfied. "Told you," he murmured, almost to himself. Camille's fingers brushed the edge of her folio. She could feel the weight of the documents inside. Not just papers, but leverage. She inhaled slowly, letting the air fill her lungs. Not yet, she thought. Not here in the aisle like some street fight. She had other ways to make them see. Behind her, someone's phone camera made a faint shutter sound. Another passenger leaned toward their neighbor, whispering. Camille glanced at the reflection in the glossy screen of the overhead bin and saw the telltale posture, a young man, phone in hand, pretending to type, but really filming. The story was already leaving the cabin. Camille stepped back just half a pace, enough to give the illusion of compliance, but kept her voice low and calm. "I will wait here," she said, "while you confirm with your supervisor. Because this," she tapped her boarding pass, "is my seat." Lauren's lips tightened. Chase Keating smiled again. Broader this time, certain he had already won. Camille knew better. The first cut in a battle was rarely the last. The cabin had fallen into an uneasy quiet, the kind that carries its own weight. It was not silence born of calm, but of attention. Even the small clicks of seat belts being fastened or zippers being drawn seemed louder in that space. Camille felt it all pressing in, the expectation, the quiet watchfulness. Iris Holloway adjusted herself in her seat. She was angled slightly toward Camille now, her hands folded neatly over the handle of her purse. Her silver hair caught the overhead light, making her presence even more pronounced. There was no hesitation in her eyes when she spoke again. "Miss," she said, her voice steady and deliberate, "I've been flying for more than 40 years. I know how boarding works. I saw you hand that ticket to the attendant. I saw you walk down here with first-class passengers. I don't see any reason you shouldn't be sitting where you belong." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried. A few passengers in business class shifted in their seats to catch a better look. The sound of a can of soda being opened from the galley felt out of place in that moment, too ordinary for what was unfolding. Lauren Keating's smile was back, but it was tighter now, the kind you hold when you know too many people are looking. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern," she said, addressing Iris without actually turning her body toward her. "But the manifest is clear." "That's what you keep saying," Iris replied. "Doesn't make it true." The words landed like a small stone on still water, sending ripples out through the cabin. Evan Park adjusted his phone slightly, the angle shifting so that both Camille and Iris were in frame. His live stream comments were a blur on the screen, emojis flashing alongside phrases like, "This is unreal," and "Name the airline." He spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Camille to hear. "Viewers are asking what seat you were assigned." 2C, Camille said without looking at the camera. "Confirmed and paid." Evan repeated it to his audience, his voice steady. 2C, paid ticket. And she's standing here because someone else is in it. Noah Delgado was lingering just a few feet away, his tablet still in hand. His shoulders were tense, as if he were caught between two doors, both closing at the same time. He leaned toward Camille, lowering his voice. "I can escalate this to my supervisor at the gate. It might take a few minutes, but it's the right way to do it." Camille met his gaze. "Then do it." Noah hesitated, glancing toward Lauren. She didn't say a word, but the flicker in her eyes was enough to make him straighten his back and step away. Chase Keating gave a quiet chuckle from the seat. "This is all a bit dramatic. Don't you think?" he said, leaning back as if settling in for a show. "In the end, it's just a chair." Camille turned her head toward him, her eyes calm but direct. "If it were just a chair," she said, "you wouldn't be fighting so hard to keep it." His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "I'm not fighting. I'm sitting where I was told to sit. And I'm standing where I was told to stand," she replied. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice in a way that made the conversation feel suddenly more personal, though half the cabin could still hear her. "Dr. Rutherford, you're holding up our departure. This really isn't worth all the trouble. We can make you comfortable in another seat, and you'll be compensated for the inconvenience." Camille tilted her head slightly. "The inconvenience is that I'm being asked to give up what I purchased to someone connected to you, without any verification beyond what's on your screen. The inconvenience is that I am being treated as if I do not belong here. That is not something you can compensate with a drink voucher." Evan's phone caught the exchange perfectly. The live stream viewer count ticked past 1,000. Comments kept scrolling. "She's handling this like a queen. Name and shame. That crew. I hope this goes viral. Iris Holloway spoke again, her voice calm but cutting. I've seen this before. Maybe not here, maybe not with you, but I've seen it. They count on people being too embarrassed to argue. Camille gave a small nod in acknowledgement, then turned her eyes back to Lorne. I'm not embarrassed, she said. For a moment, Lorne didn't respond. She looked past Camille, toward the galley, then back at Chase. It was subtle, but the connection was there. The kind of glance that passes between people who know each other well enough to communicate without words. Noah returned, his face slightly flushed. The gate supervisor says they're coming down, he said, sounding both relieved and tense. They're going to review the booking systems. Lauren's smile tightened. Fine. But while we wait, we need to keep the aisle clear. I'm not blocking anyone, Camille said, her voice even, and I'll be right here when your supervisor arrives. Chase muttered something under his breath. Evan caught it on the mic, replayed it in a low murmur to his audience. He just said, "This is ridiculous." The comments section lit up again. The flight was still at the gate. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing a slight delay due to boarding procedures, though his tone carried no hint of the drama unfolding behind the curtain. Camille could feel the minutes stretching, each one another thread tightening in the weave of this moment. She thought about walking away, just to make it end, but the thought barely formed before it dissolved. Walking away meant leaving the pattern intact. It meant confirming the assumption that her presence here was negotiable. Iris reached for her water bottle, unscrewing the cap slowly. You know, she said, sometimes you've got to let them know they picked the wrong one. Camille allowed herself the faintest smile. Sometimes, she agreed. From the back of the cabin, a woman in a navy blazer began moving forward, her pace brisk. She carried a small tablet of her own and wore the look of someone already prepared to mediate. Camille recognized the energy. It was the same look she'd seen on lawyers walking into arbitration, on executives stepping into a boardroom knowing they were about to face numbers they didn't want to explain. Evan adjusted his phone, whispering to the camera, "Looks like the supervisor's here. Stay tuned." The tension in the cabin shifted. It wasn't relief. It was anticipation, and Camille knew exactly how to use that. The woman in the navy blazer stopped just inside the curtain, scanning the scene with quick, practiced eyes. She was taller than Camille expected, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of hair that never seemed out of place no matter the hour. A small gold nameplate on her lapel read Philip Stroud, Customer Service Manager. He carried himself like someone accustomed to solving problems quickly, preferably without witnesses. But here, the witnesses were everywhere, and one of them was holding up a phone that had already captured every exchange. "Doctor?" Rutherford Stroud's voice was calm, almost warm, but there was something underneath an urgency to get control of the narrative. Camille inclined her head slightly. "That's correct. I understand there's been a seating discrepancy," he said, glancing toward Lorne before returning his attention to Camille. "We'll get this resolved." Lorne straightened a little, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mr. Stroud. The manifest has Mr. Keating in 2C, confirmed during morning check-in. Dr. Rutherford's ticket appears to be an upgrade that wasn't processed correctly." Camille's gaze stayed on Stroud. "It wasn't an upgrade. It was purchased directly. Corporate account. Paid in full." Stroud gave a small nod, the kind that signaled he'd heard, but not yet decided which version would become official. "I'll need to verify both records," he said, extending a hand toward Noah. Noah stepped forward, handing over his tablet. His eyes flicked to Camille, a subtle acknowledgement that he had at least tried to keep the process honest. Stroud scrolled for several moments, his brow tightening slightly. "It seems," he said slowly, "that the central system does have Dr. Rutherford listed for 2C, but the check-in terminal at the gate registered Mr. Keating first. That's a conflict. Conflict or not," Camille said evenly. "I boarded with my ticket, was on time, and found my seat occupied. What happens next is up to you." There was no heat in her voice, but the weight of her words seemed to hang there. She let the silence stretch just enough to make Stroud look away first. From his seat, Chase Keating gave an exaggerated sigh. "Look, I don't know how your computers work. All I know is they told me to sit here. That's what I'm doing. Seems simple. It's not simple," Camille said without looking at him. Evan's phone caught it all. The viewer count was climbing past 2,000 now, with comments scrolling fast enough to blur. Camille could feel the presence of that unseen audience, like a pressure at her back. It wasn't why she was standing her ground, but it was a reminder that this would not vanish into the air if they wanted it to. Stroud shifted his stance, one hand resting on the tablet, the other on his hip. "Here's what I propose," he began. "We reseat Dr. Rutherford in 4A for this flight. Upon arrival, we'll process a refund for the difference and provide a travel credit for the inconvenience." Camille studied him for a moment. She thought about the deals she had closed, the mergers she had blocked, the late-night negotiations where every pause was a tactic. She thought about the way people like Stroud were trained to offer a token, to make you believe it was fair, to move on quickly before the imbalance could be challenged. She placed her folio on the edge of the bulkhead wall, unzipping it slowly. The sound of the zipper was soft, but it drew eyes. Inside, neatly arranged, were documents in heavy cream folders. She pulled one free, its cover embossed with the understated logo of her company. "I think you should know," she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the first few rows, "that Rutherford Global Holdings is a strategic investor in several aviation technology firms that supply both Atlas Pacific Airlines and its competitors. I'm on this flight because tomorrow morning, in New York, I have a meeting that will determine where a very large contract will go." Lauren's eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. Stroud kept his posture neutral, but his attention sharpened. "I understand," he said carefully. "I'm also aware," Camille continued, "that public perception has measurable impact on brand valuation, especially when that perception can be shaped in real time." She didn't need to look at Evan's phone. The implication was clear enough. Stroud's jaw tightened slightly. He glanced at Chase, then at Lauren, and finally back to Camille. "I see," he said after a beat. "Let me make a call to the operations desk. Please wait here." He stepped toward the galley, speaking in low tones into a small earpiece. Lauren followed him, her smile gone now, replaced by a thin line of tension. Iris Holloway leaned forward in her seat, speaking quietly to Camille. That was a good move. Camille allowed herself the faintest smile. Sometimes paper weighs more than steel. Chase shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence dimming under the stillness that had settled on Camille. She stood as if rooted, her folio resting against her side again, the folder still visible to anyone looking. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper as he narrated to his audience. "She just told them she controls contracts that affect the airline. You can see their faces change." Minutes passed, marked only by the quiet shuffling of passengers settling themselves. The captain's voice returned, announcing they were still finalizing boarding procedures. His tone was even, but there was an edge of impatience now. Stroud reappeared, his expression measured. "Dr. Rutherford," he said, "I've spoken with operations. The system will be updated immediately to reflect your original booking. You may take your seat in 2C. Camille gave a small nod, not of gratitude, but acknowledgement. She stepped forward, her gaze meeting Chase's. "You'll need to move," she said calmly. Chase opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes flicked toward Lauren, but she was already looking away, with a muttered, "Fine." He gathered his things, the scrape of his carry-on bag against the floor sounding louder than it should. Camille slid into the seat, setting her folio carefully on the armrest. The leather felt cool under her fingertips. She fastened her seat belt, adjusted the angle of the window shade, and let out a slow, steady breath. Across the aisle, Iris gave her a nod of quiet approval. Evan lowered his phone slightly, but the red recording light still glowed. The battle for the seat was over, but Camille knew the real story was only just beginning. Because what had happened here would not stay in this cabin. It never did. Camille settled into 2C with the slow, deliberate movements of someone reclaiming ground they never should have lost. The leather of the seat was warm from Chase's body heat, the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the air. She ignored it. Her folio rested on her lap now, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of it in an absent rhythm only she could hear. Across the aisle, Iris Holloway gave her a small, satisfied smile before returning to the crossword in her lap. Evan had angled his phone slightly toward the window, narrating softly for his growing audience, but keeping Camille in the corner of the frame. She could feel the hum of the live stream without needing to see it. Chase was 2 rows behind now, in a bulkhead seat in business class. His movements were louder than necessary as he stowed his bag overhead, a petty percussion in the otherwise hushed cabin. Camille didn't turn to look at him, but she heard the muttered words meant for her back. Unbelievable. The curtain to the galley swished open. Lauren emerged. Her smile returned, but thin as tracing paper. She moved briskly down the aisle, offering hot towels to first-class passengers. When she reached Camille's row, she paused just long enough to place one on the armrest without making eye contact. The towel was folded perfectly, but the motion carried the stiffness of a peace offering made under protest. "Thank you," Camille said, her voice even. She let the word hang there, not as gratitude, but as a marker she had seen the performance and would remember it. Lauren moved on, but the air between them stayed taut. The safety announcements began. Camille listened with half an ear, her eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the sun was slipping toward the horizon, the light gilding the tarmac in gold. The engines roared to life, and the subtle vibration under her feet felt grounding. This was the point in every flight where she usually exhaled, letting herself be carried above the noise of the world below. Not this time. She could still feel the residue of the encounter, the way Lauren's authority had been wielded like a gate, the casual entitlement in Chase's voice, the calculating calm in Stroud's demeanor. These weren't new patterns. They were old, worn into the fabric of countless interactions she had witnessed and endured. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Camille closed her eyes briefly. She thought about the morning ahead, the contract meeting in Manhattan, the faces around that table, the numbers that would decide the future of entire supply chains. It was work she excelled at, the kind that required patience and strategy. And she realized now that the patience she carried into boardrooms was the same patience she had needed just to sit in her rightful seat today. The engine surged, pressing her gently into the seat back as the plane accelerated down the runway. The moment the wheels left the ground, she felt the shift that brief, weightless second when the earth let go. But the sky was not neutral. Once the seatbelt sign went off, Lauren reappeared, taking drink orders. Her tone was cordial enough with the passenger in 1A, a businessman already half buried in spreadsheets. When she reached Camille, the smile flickered but didn't vanish. "What can I get you to drink?" she asked. "Just water for now," Camille said. Lauren nodded, scribbling on her notepad, though water hardly required a record. She moved on quickly, as if Camille's presence were a smudge she could avoid by glancing past it. Minutes later, Lauren returned with a tray. The water was there, but the glass was warm to the touch, condensation already beating along the sides. Camille took a sip and set it down carefully. From the galley, muted voices carried forward. Camille couldn't make out every word, but she caught her name once, twice. The tone was unmistakable, that clipped hurried cadence of people discussing a problem they thought was out of earshot. Evan's phone angled slightly again, as if he had heard it too. He didn't speak to his audience this time. He just kept recording. Iris looked up from her crossword. "They're not done with you," she said quietly. Camille's gaze stayed forward. "I know." The flight was smooth, the kind of clear evening air pilots brag about. Dinner service began. Lauren delivered Camille's tray last, setting it down with the same mechanical precision as before. The chicken was slightly overcooked, the vegetables limp. Camille noted it, but said nothing. She wasn't here to critique the food. Halfway through the meal service, Philip Stroud came forward from the galley, leaning down to speak to Lauren. His voice was low, but Camille saw the way his eyes flicked toward her before he walked back again. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a secure message from her executive assistant. "Saw the stream." "You okay, Camille?" Typed back with one hand. "Fine. Keep watching." She let her eyes close for a moment, feeling the steady hum of the engines beneath her. But her mind was turning over the details, the gate check-in timestamp, the connection between Lauren and Chase, the way Stroud had moved only when her leverage was visible. These were pieces of a puzzle she had seen before in other contexts: favoritism, quiet exclusions, small abuses of authority that compounded into patterns strong enough to shut people out entirely, and patterns could be dismantled. She opened her eyes to find Evan watching her over the top of his phone. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod, the kind that passed between people who had decided, without saying it, that the truth mattered. Camille returned the nod, then took another sip of her warm water. The glass felt heavier now, as if holding it were a choice in itself to keep her presence visible, unyielding, even in something as small as lifting a glass in a cabin, where some hoped she would disappear into silence. The plane cruised on, a silver thread in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Camille was not going anywhere. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights had dimmed to a soft glow. Most passengers in first class had settled into movies or half sleep, the steady hum of the engines like a lullaby. Camille was not sleeping. She sat upright, her reading light casting a warm circle over the open folder in her lap. Inside were pages of projections, contracts, and margin analysis, but her focus kept drifting back to the people moving in the galley and the weight of the earlier confrontation. Lauren passed through the cabin, collecting empty glasses. She stopped at the seat in front of Camille, leaning down to speak to a middle-aged man in a navy sport coat. Her voice was pitched just low enough to be intimate, but Camille still caught pieces of it. Unfortunate boarding situation. We do our best to make everyone comfortable. Some people just want a scene." The man chuckled softly, glancing briefly over his shoulder toward Camille. Camille did not look away. She held his gaze until he turned back around, suddenly intent on the in-flight map scrolling across his screen. Lauren moved to Camille's row next. "Would you like me to take your glass?" she asked, her tone wrapped in polite formality. "It's fine where it is," Camille replied. Lauren nodded once and moved on, but Camille caught the way her jaw tightened. Small tells always betrayed the mask. From across the aisle, Iris Holloway lowered her crossword and leaned slightly toward Camille. "She's still talking about it," she murmured. Camille closed her folder. "I know." The quiet was broken a few minutes later when a commotion rose from the second row of business class. A young black man in his late 20s, slim build, wearing a gray hoodie, stood up, holding a boarding pass. His voice was raised, but not in anger. It was the kind of volume born of disbelief. "This isn't the seat I paid for," he said. "I booked extra legroom, and you've got me in a regular seat now. Can we fix this?" Lauren appeared instantly, stepping through the curtain with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, you're in the seat assigned to you at check-in," she said. "That's not what my ticket says," he replied, holding out the pass. Lauren didn't look at it. "Sir, I'll need you to lower your voice." Camille felt the shift in the cabin. This was the same tone, the same deflection she had given earlier. Only now, it was aimed at someone else. The man in the hoodie pressed again. "I'm not yelling. I'm telling you, I paid for something and didn't get it." Lauren gave a quick glance toward the galley, where Stroud was emerging. He took the ticket, scanned it, and without apology said, "There was an equipment change. You're in a standard seat now. We can process a refund later." The man's shoulders stiffened. "Later. That's it." Stroud's smile was corporate neutral. "That's it." Camille could see the frustration rising in the man's face. She also saw the way a few passengers in business class were shaking their heads, as if annoyed by the interruption rather than the injustice. Evan's phone was already angled toward the exchange. His viewers were getting another chapter of the story, one that mirrored the first too closely to ignore. Camille unfastened her seatbelt and stood, moving to the curtain. She didn't insert herself immediately. She simply watched until Stroud noticed her presence. "Dr. Rutherford," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Is everything all right, it seems," Camille said, "that another passenger has experienced a similar discrepancy to mine." Stroud's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something sharper in his eyes. "It's not the same situation." "On the surface, maybe not," Camille replied, "but the pattern feels familiar." Lauren shifted beside him, clearly uncomfortable. "Dr. Rutherford, we have this under control." Camille's gaze moved between them. Under control, or under wraps. The man in the hoodie looked at her with a mix of confusion and recognition. "You were the one they tried to move out of first class," he said quietly. Camille nodded once. "And I'm telling you, don't let the conversation end at later." Stroud straightened, his voice taking on a firm edge. "Dr. Rutherford, please return to your seat. We'll handle this." Camille didn't move. "I'm sure you will," she said evenly, "and I'll be here to see how." For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the engines filled the space between them. Finally, Stroud stepped back and gestured for Lauren to switch the man into an empty bulkhead seat. She did so quickly, without further comment. Camille returned to her seat, fastening her belt again. Iris gave her a knowing smile. You didn't have to say much. Sometimes you don't, Camille said. Evan kept recording. His viewers were flooding the chat with comments about patterns, about bias, about how small decisions in the air mirrored the inequities on the ground. Camille didn't read them, but she knew the shape of the conversation already. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from her assistant. Social engagement's exploding. This is moving fast. Camille typed back, "Document everything." The rest of the cabin settled again. But it was a brittle calm, the kind that could crack with the slightest pressure. Camille could feel the fault lines running through the crew, the passengers, the entire situation, and she knew before the wheels touched the runway, those cracks were going to widen. She picked up her water, took a slow sip, and looked out at the dark sky. Somewhere ahead, the city lights of New York would come into view, and with them, the next move. The hum of the engines was steady now, a white noise backdrop to conversations too low to catch, and the occasional clink of glassware from the galley. Camille sat with her seat slightly reclined, the overhead lights still on, her folio closed and resting against her knees. On the surface, she looked like any other first-class passenger winding down for the rest of the flight. But beneath that stillness, she was already in motion. She slid her phone from the side pocket of her bag and unlocked it with her thumbprint. The cabin's Wi-Fi connection was strong. She had paid for the secure tier before they'd even left the ground. Her fingers moved quickly, navigating not to social media, but to a secure messaging app her company used for high-sensitivity communications. She typed a short message to her executive assistant, Serena Initiate Skyline Protocol. Use timestamp from livestream as incident marker. Skyline Protocol wasn't written in any manual. It was an internal sequence of steps designed for situations exactly like this, moments where her personal presence intersected with reputational risk to companies in her investment network. She knew from Serena's immediate understood reply that the wheels were already turning. Serena would alert their aviation technology partners, several of whom had pending bids with Atlas Pacific Airlines. Those partners would quietly log the incident, forward it to compliance departments, and flag it for review in procurement meetings. In under 15 minutes. What had begun as one-seat dispute was now embedded in the decision-making frameworks of multiple corporate boards. Camille tucked the phone into her lap and glanced across the aisle. Evan was still recording, though now he alternated between showing the cabin and whisper-reading comments from his audience. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, not seeking approval, just an acknowledgement that the recording was part of the picture now. From the galley curtain, Lauren emerged again, moving with a deliberate pace. She passed Camille's seat without stopping, but Camille didn't miss the subtle shift in her posture. There was tension there, the kind that came when you couldn't quite name the threat, but could feel it closing in. Camille sipped her now cool water. The taste was metallic. She thought about the man in the hoodie, seated now at the bulkhead with his legs stretched out, earbuds in. His face was turned toward the window, but his jaw was tight. She knew that look, the quiet calculation of whether the fight had been worth it, the unspoken knowledge that these moments stacked up over time. Her own internal ledger was long, too long. She opened a new message, this one addressed to two contacts in Washington. The first was Senator Marjorie Kane, who chaired the Senate Aviation Oversight Committee. The second was a deputy director at the FAA's Office of Civil Rights. Both knew Camille personally, not just from conferences and panels, but from the kind of behind-the-scenes negotiations that had shaped regulatory frameworks in the past decade. Her message was concise, clinical in tone, In-flight incident. Atlas Pacific 4111 timestamped evidence available. Relevance to procurement, integrity, and crew bias protocol. Will forward documentation upon landing. She hit send and slipped the phone back into her bag. There was no need for further explanation. They would understand the implications. Across the aisle, Iris Holloway watched her with quiet curiosity. Making a call without making a call, she asked softly. Camille smiled faintly. Something like that. Dinner trays were cleared. Lights dimmed further. Most passengers settled under blankets, some already drifting into sleep. But for Camille, the altitude felt electric, a liminal space where moves could be made without the other side realizing they were already in play. Stroud walked through the cabin once, glancing at each passenger. When his eyes met Camille's, she held the look just long enough to see the uncertainty flicker there. He moved on without speaking. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes, but her mind stayed in motion. She imagined the messages pinging across time zones, compliance officers flagging emails, procurement analysts adding new notes to vendor profiles, communications teams drafting in case of inquiry statements they hoped they would never have to use. Every one of those pings was a thread, and she was the one holding the loom. A soft chime rang through the cabin, a turbulence warning. The seatbelt signs blinked on. The plane dipped slightly, then steadied. Lauren's voice came over the PA, reminding everyone to remain seated. Camille fastened her belt, her hands calm on the buckle. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same voice that had tried to move her from her seat was now telling everyone to stay exactly where they were. She thought about what would happen after landing. The sequence she had set in motion wasn't designed for spectacle. It was designed for inevitability. There would be meetings behind closed doors, phone calls that started with off the record, and eventually, decisions that seemed to appear out of nowhere, but had been months in the making. And if the live stream kept circulating as she suspected it would, the pressure would mount faster. Public scrutiny had a way of speeding up private accountability. She glanced at the man in the hoodie again. He caught her eye this time, lifting his chin slightly in a silent thanks. She returned the gesture. The turbulence eased. The cabin settled back into its previous rhythm. But Camille could feel the shift. It wasn't visible yet, but it was there, the crew's wariness, the passengers' sideways glances, the awareness that this flight was no longer just a flight. She reached into her folio and pulled out a pen, jotting a brief note in the margin of a contract draft. Altitude is just another stage. Never forget the audience. When she set the pen down, her hands were steady. The rest of the flight might pass in quiet, but the landing would not, and that was exactly the point. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into New York shortly. Please ensure your seatbacks and tray tables are in their upright positions. The chime sounded, and the cabin lights brightened slightly. Passengers stirred, stretching legs and finishing last sips of coffee or tea. Camille straightened her seat, sliding her folio back into her bag. Her face was composed, but inside she felt the shift not of altitude, but of momentum. Across the aisle, Iris Holloway caught her eye. "Almost home," she said quietly. Camille gave a small nod. "Almost." From the galley, Philip Stroud stepped into the aisle, speaking in low tones to Lauren. It was subtle, but Camille saw the difference immediately. His posture was tighter. Lauren's expression, even under her trained smile, carried the faint rigidity of someone bracing for impact. She glanced toward the cockpit, then back at him. Evan, still holding his phone at a discreet angle, murmured into it. "Something's happening. They look nervous." The live chat on his screen scrolled so fast Camille could see it. Even from her seat, comments speculating, analyzing, demanding updates. Stroud moved briskly toward the front, disappearing into the cockpit for less than a minute before re-emerging. His face was set in a careful neutral, but his eyes flicked over the first-class cabin as though taking inventory. Lauren followed, leaning down to whisper to him again. Camille couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She had seen this kind of choreography before in boardrooms, in political corridors, the body language of people trying to hold control while the floor shifted under them. Camille slid her phone from her bag again. A new message from Serena lit up the screen. Confirmed. Procurement teams paused pending review. FAA request for preliminary incident report already sent to Atlas Pacific HQ. Another message came seconds later. Senator Kane's office made contact. Media inquiry in progress. Camille's lips curved almost imperceptibly. The descent was literal, but for the airline, it was also metaphorical. The man in the hoodie, now watching the activity with interest, leaned slightly toward Camille. "Is this about earlier?" "It's about a lot of things," she replied softly. He didn't ask more, but his eyes stayed on Stroud as the manager returned to the galley, his steps quickening. The plane banked, angling toward the sprawl of lights beginning to glow in the evening haze. Camille looked out the window, the grid of Manhattan streets faint but distinct, the rivers catching the last streaks of daylight. Below, millions of lives were in motion, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing 30,000 feet above them. Over the PA. Lauren's voice carried a slightly sharper edge than before. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." She moved down the aisle to check belts and latches, pausing briefly at Camille's row. "Everything's secure here. Dr. Rutherford." Camille met her gaze. "Everything's in place." Lauren's jaw tightened just enough to be noticed before she moved on. As the wheels lowered with a muffled thud, Camille could feel the air in the cabin change. The conversations around her had quieted, and even those who didn't know the details sensed an undercurrent of unease from the crew. The turbulence was minimal, but the atmosphere was heavy. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unfamiliar number, but the signature at the bottom made her pause. Martin Greer, CEO, Atlas Pacific Airlines. The message was short. "Dr. Rutherford, I've been made aware of a situation on Flight 411. I'd like to speak as soon as you land." She typed back, "Understood. I'll make time." The landing gear locked with a final clunk. The city lights grew brighter, larger. Camille tucked her phone away, fastening her gaze forward as the runway rushed up to meet them. The moment the wheels touched down, she felt that subtle release, the body knowing it was back on solid ground. But for the airline, nothing would feel solid for long. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the crew's choreography became even more strained. Stroud disappeared again into the cockpit, returning with a stiff half-smile that convinced no one. Lauren moved briskly, avoiding eye contact with Camille entirely. Heaven's phone captured it, all the clipped movements, the low whispers, the kind of tension that made even seasoned travelers sit up straighter. The captain's voice came again. "Welcome to New York. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've reached the gate." Camille sat still, her hands resting lightly on her knees. She had no intention of moving first. She knew from experience that patience was often the most unnerving tactic. As the jet bridge approached, a voice from the galley caught her attention, a hushed, urgent tone. "They want to meet her at the door." Lauren's response was just as low. "Who's someone from corporate?" "They're already here." Camille didn't react outwardly. But inside, she felt the pieces lock into place. The descent was over. The confrontation was about to begin. The seatbelt sign went off with a familiar chime. Passengers unbuckled, the rustle of bags and jackets filling the cabin. But Camille stayed seated, watching the forward galley with measured calm. She could hear them now, voices just beyond the closed door, speaking in clipped, businesslike tones. Lauren moved toward the exit, her professional smile firmly in place. She was met by two men in dark suits and a woman in a navy coat. Their IDs hung on lanyards. The woman spoke first, her voice low but edged with authority. "We're here for Dr. Camille Rutherford." Lauren hesitated. "She's a passenger." The man beside her produced a document holder. "FAA Liaison, Department of Transportation. We need to speak with her before disembarkation." Stroud appeared from the galley, intercepting. "This is highly irregular. Whatever this is, it can be handled through proper channels after the FAA liaison cut him off. The channels have already been engaged. Mr. Stroud, we're here on direct request." Evan's camera phone caught the exchange from his seat. His live chat exploded with messages. "Whoa! Who are they? This is like a movie. Don't stop recording." Lauren's eyes darted toward Camille, who was still seated, her expression unreadable. Slowly, Camille rose, smoothing the front of her jacket. She stepped into the aisle, with the quiet assurance of someone who had been here before. Maybe not on a plane, but in rooms where control was currency. "I'm Dr. Rutherford," she said. The woman in the navy coat extended a hand. "Agent Carlisle, FAA. We've been briefed on an in-flight incident and would like to speak privately before you leave the jet bridge." Camille glanced briefly at Stroud and Lauren, then back to Carlisle. "Of course." The first-class cabin had gone silent. Even the shuffle of bags seemed to pause. Passengers leaned subtly into the aisle, curiosity etched on their faces. Iris Holloway smiled faintly from her seat. "Go get 'em," she murmured. Camille followed the agents toward the door. Stroud moved to intercept again, but Carlisle stepped into his path. "You'll remain here, sir. We'll speak with you shortly." The air at the doorway felt colder. The jet bridge beyond was empty except for two uniformed Port Authority officers and a man Camille recognized instantly, Martin Greer, CEO of Atlas Pacific Airlines. His presence here meant one thing. The story had reached a level that demanded direct damage control. "Dr. Rutherford," he said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth, but the tension in his grip betrayed him. "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." "Do you?" Camille asked, her tone even. Greer hesitated before replying. "I understand there was a misunderstanding during boarding." Carlisle's brow lifted. "That's one word for it." Camille didn't step closer, didn't fill the space with noise. Silence had its own gravity, and in moments like this, it pulled more than words ever could. Greer shifted, glancing at the agents. "If we could have a moment alone." "No," Carlisle said flatly. "This discussion will be documented in the presence of federal oversight. Given the nature of the complaints and the evidence circulating publicly, transparency is non-negotiable." Evan's phone captured Camille stepping just far enough into the jet bridge for the camera to see her flanked by both corporate and federal representatives. The image was already flooding social feeds before she even spoke. "Mr. Greer," she said, "I believe you're aware that the seating misunderstanding was part of a broader pattern. I've observed it firsthand, not just toward myself, but toward another passenger during this flight. Patterns matter, and when those patterns suggest bias, they're not misunderstandings. They're operational failures." Greer's jaw tightened. "We take these matters seriously." Camille's gaze didn't waver, So seriously that procurement reviews have already been paused and the FAA has an incident file before we've even reached baggage claim. One of the Port Authority officers glanced at the other. Greer's eyes flickered, confirming her guess that he'd only learned of the procurement freeze moments ago. Carlyle spoke next. Dr. Rutherford will be requesting a full statement, as well as your cooperation in an expanded review of Atlas Pacific's bias training compliance. Happy to cooperate, Camille said. I'll have my office forward documentation within the hour. The boarding door remained open, passengers now inching forward in the aisle behind Lauren. Stroud tried to usher them out quietly, but Evan's camera caught every frame Lauren's tight expression, Stroud's stiff posture, the corporate and federal presence bottlenecking the exit. Greer lowered his voice. Camille, may I speak candidly? You may, she said, though she didn't lower hers. This is going to hit the press, he said, and hard. We can work together to manage it. Camille's laugh was short and without humor. You think I'm here to manage it down? I'm here to make sure it's handled up. There's a difference. For a beat, no one spoke. The only sound was the hiss of the jet bridge's ventilation system. Finally, Carlyle turned to Greer. We'll need your crew logs, training records, and any communications related to the incident by close of business tomorrow. Greer gave a small nod, his shoulders stiff. Camille stepped back toward the cabin entrance. I'll be in touch. Mr. Greer. The walk back to her seat was short, but every eye was on her. She sat, buckled, and waited as passengers began to file past. Iris leaned toward her. That looked like a checkmate. Not yet, Camille murmured. But the board is set. When it was her turn to leave, she rose without hurry, meeting Lauren's eyes one last time. The flight attendant's polished veneer had cracked just slightly, but enough. Camille stepped into the jet bridge, her phone already in hand, ready for the next call. The jet bridge spilled into a bright gate area that already felt charged. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. Rolling suitcases rattled over tile. A half circle of cameras pointed toward the aircraft door as if the plane itself were a witness. Camille stepped out with measured pace, folio in hand, posture easy but unyielding. Evan stayed a few steps back, phone up, narrating in a calm whisper for thousands now watching in real time. Iris followed slowly behind, protective without being obvious. A few passengers from business class hovered near the glass wall, curiosity drawing them like a tide. Two communications staffers in Atlas Pacific badges hurried toward Martin Greer. One tried to angle his body between the cameras and the CEO. It did not matter. Lenses had already found him. A microphone with a blue logo pushed forward. Mr. Greer, did your crew attempt to remove a first-class passenger because of a status card check? Greer's jaw tightened. We are gathering facts. The safety and dignity of our customers are our highest priorities. The words were polished. The tone was not. He looked at Camille and gave a small nod that asked for space. She did not grant it. She turned so her voice would carry. My name is Dr. Camille Rutherford. I held a confirmed first-class ticket for C2C on Atlas Pacific Flight 411. I was blocked from my seat without cause and asked to move to another section while a relative of a crew member remained where I had paid to sit. I was not the only passenger pressured to accept less than what he purchased. I want to be very clear. What happened today is not a misunderstanding. It is a pattern. Microphones edged closer. The gate area stilled. Even the conveyor of a nearby snack kiosk seemed to quiet. Agent Carlyle from the FAA stepped into view, her badge visible. We have opened a preliminary inquiry. We will be gathering statements and records immediately. A reporter lifted her press badge. Dana Whitmore. She had been quiet during the flight. Now her voice was crisp. Dr. Rutherford, are you alleging discrimination? I am describing what occurred, Camille said. The words used, the posture taken, the decisions made. When those elements line up against the same kind of passenger again and again, you do not need to allege. You only need to point. Her phone buzzed. An incoming call lit the screen. Senator Marjorie Kane. Camille answered and pressed speaker. The circle of cameras leaned in. Dr. Rutherford, the senator said, her voice steady and unmistakable. My office has been briefed. The hearing on airline accountability is on the calendar next week. Based on what I have seen tonight, this incident will be entered into the record. Mr. Greer, I advise your company to engage in immediate corrective action. The clock is not your friend. A murmur rippled through the gate. Greer lifted his chin. Senator, Atlas Pacific is committed to full cooperation. Good, Senator Kane said. Then you will not object to on-site commitments. Camille let a breath move through her. Calm in. Resolve out. She raised her eyes to Greer. Here is what resolves this, she said, each word measured. First, remove the flight attendant Lauren Keating from duty pending termination review for cause. Second, place customer service manager Philip Stroud on immediate administrative leave and initiate an external review of gate and cabin authority decisions on Flight 411. Third, issue a lifetime ban to the passenger Chase Keating for fraudulent occupancy of a paid seat and for interfering with crew integrity. Fourth, implement a real-time bias and incident reporting system across Atlas Pacific within 72 hours. The system will notify executive leadership and the FAA when a credible report is filed. Fifth, establish a passenger equity fund of $50 million within 30 days to provide direct compensation to customers affected by discriminatory practices. Funds will be administered by an independent third party approved by the FAA and the Senate committee. She paused. The quiet deepened. Cameras waited. People held their breath without realizing it. Greer spoke carefully. Those are significant demands. They are measured, Camille replied. They are also necessary. Agent Carlisle stepped closer. From a compliance perspective, the fourth and fifth items will materially reduce systemic risk over time. Donna raised her microphone. Dr. Rutherford, do you benefit from any of these actions? No, Camille said. There is no fee, no contract, and no benefit to me or my company. My aim is accountability and prevention. My firm will not administer the training or the fund. Independent partners will. Greer looked down at his phone. A text from legal, another from the board chair, a third from the head of procurement who had already felt the pause triggered by Camille's network. His face gave nothing away, but the weight of those messages pulled at his shoulders. A reporter called out, Mr. Greer, will you agree right now? Greer did not answer. He looked at Camille. I need to consult my team. You have 60 seconds, Camille said. This is a live environment. The terms are public. Delay is also public. The number landed like a bell tolling. Evan repeated it quietly into his stream. She gave him 60 seconds. His chat erupted. The count began to scroll in text. 59, 58, 57. Greer's communications lead leaned in. We cannot decide this here. Greer did not look at him. He called his general counsel. One ring. Connection. He listened, eyes fixed on the floor tile, as a list of risks and remedies spilled through the line. He looked up at Agent Carlisle. "If we agree now, will the FAA acknowledge the steps while the investigation proceeds? We will confirm receipt and monitor execution," she said. "The inquiry remains open. 35. Greer put the call on hold and dialed the board chair. The exchange was short, urgent, stripped of pleasantries. He ended it and lifted his head. 23. Camille stood without moving, calm as ocean stone. Iris watched her with quiet pride. Evan held the frame steady, breath barely audible. Greer exhaled. "Atlas Pacific will agree to all 5 terms." The gate area reacted in waves, a soft gasp, a chorus of whispers, then applause that began near the back and rolled forward like wind through tall grass. Some of it was relief. Some of it was recognition. People knew when a door had opened that had been closed for too long. Camille did not smile. Commit to timelines. Greer nodded, effective immediately. Lauren Keating removed from duty. Philip Stroud placed on leave pending external review. Ban notice for Chase Keating issued before midnight. Bias and incident reporting system deployed within 72 hours. Passenger equity fund fully funded within 30 days with first disbursements within 60 days. A public apology issued within 24 hours. We will consult with the FAA and the Senate Committee on Approved Third Parties. Senator Kane spoke from the phone. Noted. My staff will expect written confirmation and daily progress updates until all items are complete. Understood, Greer said. Agent Carlisle added. We will also require preservation of all communications related to the incident, including internal messaging and crew logs. Of course, Greer replied. Camille looked from the agents to the cameras, to the faces that had gathered at the glass. She thought of the man in the hoodie and the way he had looked out the window, wondering if the fight had been worth it. She thought of her father pushing past closed doors with nothing but a lunch pail and quiet pride. She thought of all the small moments that never made the news. She lifted the phone from her palm and took it off speaker. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for not letting go, Senator Kane said, and ended the call. A final question cut through the noise. Dana again. Dr. Rutherford, what do you want people to take from what happened here? Camille let the pause breathe. That dignity is not a perk. It is a right. That silence can be strategy, but never surrender. And that when a pattern hurts people, it is not enough to fix one's seat. You fix the system. The applause came again, fuller now. Evan lowered his phone just for a second and wiped at the corner of his eye. Surprised by his own reaction, Iris reached and squeezed Camille's hand. Greer stood very still. He had agreed. Now he would have to deliver. The gate agents reopened the stanchions. The terminal noises returned in fragments. Wheelchairs rolled forward. A child laughed at the echo under the high ceiling. The world resumed, but it was not the same. Camille glanced toward the window, where the aircraft tail rose against the night. Then she turned toward the exit that led to the baggage claim, the car line, and whatever came next. She walked with the same measured pace she had carried onto the plane hours earlier. Only now the ground beneath her feet felt different. It felt like consequence. Security ribbons parted to open a lane toward a side office. The crowd thinned. The cameras drifted back. The noise faded into a steady airport hush. Camille felt the way momentum changes a room. Heat becomes light. Noise becomes intention. It was happening now. Agent Carlisle coordinated with a Port Authority officer and stepped aside to make space. Lauren Keating appeared between 2 station supervisors. Her posture was upright. Her eyes were bright with a steadiness that was almost brittle. A supervisor held out a small plastic tray. Lauren placed her company badge inside, then her crew lanyard, then a slim access card. Her fingers paused on the card for a heartbeat that felt longer than it was. She let it go. Philip Stroud arrived next, flanked by an operations lead and an HR representative with a tablet. He did not resist. He signed a receipt for temporary custody of his device. He handed over a radio clipped to his belt. His voice was level when he asked where he should wait for the external review. The HR rep pointed to a door and thanked him for his cooperation. The word cooperation looked heavy in the air. Across the concourse, a notification chimed on a phone with the Atlas Pacific logo. A gate agent glanced down, then another at a nearby counter, then a third. A short message had gone out to all station staff in the hub. Confidence message issued. Bias and incident reporting tool will go live in 72 hours. Preservation order in effect. Everyone rid. Everyone looked up. A pair of uniformed officers approached a man near the window. Chase Keating stood, arms folded tight across his chest. He looked between the officers and his phone. He had just read the email. The words were plain. Permanent ban from Atlas Pacific flights. Term cited. He tried to laugh it off. It did not come out as a laugh. The officers were calm. They explained the process. They asked for acknowledgement of receipt. He signed on the screen with a small angry loop for a signature. He looked toward Camille then, surprised by the impulse to seek an appeal in her eyes. She met his look without anger and without invitation. He dropped his gaze first. Evan kept his camera on the wide shot. He narrated in a near whisper. His voice had changed. The heat was gone. What remained was quiet witness. He panned to Iris, who stood at a slight distance with her purse in both hands. Iris nodded once toward the office where Lauren had gone. Her face was thoughtful and tired and sure. Agent Carlyle returned to Camille with 2 forms and a recorder. She spoke in clear lines that did not waste time. She asked for a statement on the sequence of events. Camille answered in the same clear lines. Times, phrases, movements. She added the observation about the second passenger in business class and the equipment change explanation. She used the word pattern again. Carlyle wrote it in the margin and underlined it. A familiar figure stepped from the jet bridge. Captain Warren Holt. His hat was tucked under his arm. He had the bearing of a man who had flown through a lot of weather and still loved the sky. He approached with a measured pace and stopped an arm's length away. "Dr. Rutherford," he said, "I want to apologize on behalf of the flight deck. Our duty is to everyone on board. That includes dignity. If I had known what was unfolding in the cabin, I would have stepped forward sooner. I did not. I am sorry." Camille read the sincerity in the lines around his eyes. She held his apology with care. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "Your words matter." He cleared his throat. "With your permission, I would like to walk you to baggage claim. There is no protocol that requires it. I am asking because it is the right thing to do, and because my daughters will ask me what I did tonight." For the first time since the aircraft door opened, Camille let a small smile reach her eyes. "I would be honored. Captain Holt." They began to move. Not a procession and not a performance. Just 2 people walking. Evan followed at a respectful distance. He lifted his phone, then paused. He looked at his screen and at the 2 figures ahead and made a choice. He lowered the phone and slid it into his pocket. The chat erupted with question marks. He typed a quiet note instead. "Give them a moment." He watched with his eyes. It felt right. As they passed the man in the hoodie, he straightened and stepped toward Camille. "Thank you," he said. No edge in his voice now. Just something clean and steady. Thank you for not letting them make it small." She touched his shoulder lightly. "You did that too," she said. "Do not forget it." At the base of the escalator, Iris caught up. She walked on the other side of Camille. 3 people in a line that felt like a simple answer to a complicated day. Iris spoke without looking over. "I flew through here in '79 with my husband on our way to see his mother. We were moved 3 times that day for no reasons that made sense. He told me to let it go. I carried it anyway. I am going to sleep better tonight." Camille listened in that deliberate way she had. Then she said, "Soft things do not mean small things. Sometimes the quiet parts change the world more than the loud ones." They reached the carousel. The belt was not moving yet. A digital sign flickered and then confirmed the flight number. People gathered in loose circles, some stealing second looks, some giving nods that lasted half a second longer than usual. Martin Greer approached again, slower this time. There was no podium here, no cameras in his face now, just the weight of what he had agreed to carry. He looked at Captain Holt, then at Camille. "Thank you for walking with me toward this," he said to her. "I know it is not your job to fix what we broke. It is your job." Camille said, "I will watch. Others will watch. The work will either get done or it will not. If it does, you will not need me next time. That is the only outcome that interests me." He nodded. "I understand." The belt started to move with a clank and a hum. The first bag slid down. A child clapped at the emerging luggage like it was a small parade. In another corner of the carousel area, Agent Carlisle spoke quietly with a pair of airport police officers and a representative from the union. She handed them a checklist: preservation order, training rosters, communications archive. Her pen moved. People listened. Camille's phone vibrated again. Serena had sent a summary. Procurement pauses confirmed across 3 partner firms. Press calls multiplying. Independent fund administrators sending proposals by morning. Camille replied with a single word: "Noted." The carousel delivered a familiar black suitcase with a thin red ribbon tied to the handle. Camille stepped forward. Captain Holt reached to lift it as a simple courtesy. She let him. He set it down beside her with a gentle thud. Captain Holt looked at her and then beyond her. He squared his shoulders. He spoke in a voice that could carry to any cabin. "When a door is closed to the right person, a pilot knows what to do. You turn around, you return to the gate, you start again. We will start again." A few nearby passengers applauded, small and sincere. It was not the roar of the gate area earlier. That was fine. This moment did not need to be loud. Evan stood a little apart, thinking about the digital witness idea he had scribbled into his notes on the plane. A foundation that could teach people how to document and de-escalate and insist with clarity. He had not meant to think like a founder tonight. Now the thought would not leave. Iris touched Camille's arm. "I have a granddaughter who wants to be a pilot. I'm going to send her the clip of the captain and your steps at that door. She will know what air looks like when it moves the right way." Camille exhaled. The day was still inside her. The tight coil of attention and intention. She let a little of it go with the air. "Thank you," she said to Iris. "Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Evan." And to Agent Carlisle across the room. She lifted a hand. The agent nodded back, already working the next page of the checklist. Greer lingered for a moment more, then turned away to brief his team. He did not look like a man escaping a camera anymore. He looked like a man beginning a long assignment with no shortcuts. Camille rolled her suitcase toward the sliding doors. The night air beyond the glass was black and silver. Taxi lights blinked in careful lines. She felt tired. She felt clear. She felt the shape of what would come next. The doors opened. The cool air found her face. She stepped out into it with that same measured ease that had carried her through jet bridges and boardrooms and days that asked too much. Tonight, it asked a lot. She answered. Tomorrow would ask again. She would answer again. Not louder, only truer. The morning after, the apology went live. No music, no graphics, just Martin Greer at a plain desk, speaking into a camera with tired eyes. He named what happened. He did not say misunderstanding. He said bias and failure and harm. He said Dr. Camille Rutherford by name. He apologized to the man in the hoodie. He apologized to everyone who had seen themselves in that aisle. Within 72 hours, the new reporting system lit up across Atlas Pacific. Small icons appeared in the Airline app and on gate screens. Report incident. Real time. Anonymous or named. The alerts went to executive leadership, to compliance, and to the FAA at the same moment. Preservation orders triggered automatically. Screenshots flowed to secure folders. The paper trail became a living thing. Staff briefings ran on the hour. Not a video to click past, but live sessions with questions and notes and faces. Union reps sat beside compliance officers. Station managers sat beside new hires. Noah Delgado was in the second row at his hub, a legal pad open, a fresh pen in hand. He asked the first question of the day. What do we do when the system conflicts with what we are seeing with our own eyes? The trainer circled the question on a whiteboard. Start here, she said. 30 days later. The Passenger Equity Fund opened its portal. Not a maze, not a wall of text, just a set of simple questions and a status bar. Claims were reviewed by an independent partner. Compensation posted to bank accounts without a phone tree. On launch day, the first approvals landed. People shared screenshots the way people once shared vacation photos, not as celebration, but as relief. Lauren Keating did not return to duty. The external review described a series of choices that crossed from error into harm. It did not flatten her into a villain. It named training gaps and cultural signals that had rewarded certainty over care. It did not remove accountability. It put that accountability in a context that made future change possible. She received her notice. She did not speak to the press. That silence belonged to her. Philip Stroud accepted the findings that placed him on leave. He wrote a letter that acknowledged how quickly he reached for a voucher and a seat swap. He explained how easy it had been to see a problem as a schedule rather than a person. He did not ask to be excused. He asked to learn. The airline did not bring him back to his role. Months later, he would sit on a community advisory board, listening more than speaking. The man in the hoodie received a personal apology and a refund that matched the difference he had been promised. It arrived with a note from a real person at the airline. He read it once, then again, then closed the laptop and went for a long walk around his block. That night, he slept without replaying the exchange in his head. Evan Park incorporated the Digital Witness Initiative with the help of a professor who had taught media ethics in an afternoon classroom with flickering lights. The first workshops were held in a borrowed library room. 10 people came, then 20, then 100 on a live stream. The curriculum was simple. Record preserve. De-escalate when you can. Escalate when you must. And know the law of the place you are standing. He raised small donations and turned them into small grants for travelers who had documented hard moments without turning them into spectacles. Senator Marjorie Kane held the hearing a week later. It did not have the drama of a movie. It had folders and sworn statements and long hours. Camille spoke without ornament. She described times and tones and the slow burn of stacked assumptions. Agent Carlyle presented early data from the reporting system. Dana Whitmore entered her article into the record and then asked 2 questions that quieted the room. Iris Holloway sat at the back with a notebook and a thermos of tea. At one point, she closed her eyes and nodded to herself, as if releasing something she had carried since her flight in '79. The Passenger Equity Act moved out of committee with a bipartisan vote. It did not solve everything. No law can. It did set clear deadlines for incident responses. It required independent audits of training effectiveness. It created whistleblower protections for crew who reported patterns, not just events. It made it harder to bury a problem under a shift change. Atlas Pacific trained with independent partners chosen by the FAA and the Senate Committee. Not a slide deck, but scenario work where people spoke lines they had spoken before, and then learned to hear them as other people heard them. A captain sat in the front row sometimes. Warren Holt came to one session on his day off, hat in his lap, listening like a student. In a quiet hour at home, Camille placed a boarding pass into a thin wood frame. 2C, Flight 411. The date printed in small letters. She set it on a shelf in her office beside a simple photo of her father standing next to a bus stop sign on a winter morning. Lunch pail in one hand, coat collar turned up against the cold. She did not curate the room for visitors. She curated it for memory. Serena emailed a monthly summary. Procurement pauses had been lifted for firms that adopted the reporting standard. The fund had paid out to hundreds. The average response time on incident review had fallen below 24 hours. The number of first responses that included a real apology rose each month. Serena added a short line at the end. A reminder that you are speaking at the university next week. Topic requested is dignity as infrastructure. Camille smiled at the phrase and replied, "Yes." Noah received an internal award for speaking up in the training session. It came with a letter signed by the head of customer operations. He taped the letter inside the door of his locker, not where others would see it, but where he would. Before each shift, he read the first sentence. "Thank you for choosing clarity over speed." At the next hub visit, Camille saw a small girl with braids and a backpack covered in stars turn to stare at Captain Holt as he walked by. The girl lifted her hand in a tiny wave. The captain stopped, crouched to her height, and asked if she liked airplanes. She said she wanted to fly one. He told her she would. He said it like a statement of weather. Clear morning tomorrow. Camille did not return to the news cycle. She granted one long interview to Dana that read like a case study rather than a profile. The headline was plain: How a Seat Became a System. The last paragraph quoted a line Camille had scribbled on a contract draft in the air. Altitude is another stage. Never forget the audience. On a cool evening a few months later, Iris received a message from her granddaughter. It was a photo of a young woman in a flight school hangar, hands on a headset, grin like sunrise. The caption said, "First solo next week." Iris sat at her kitchen table with the phone face down and let herself cry for a minute, the way you do when a circle closes and opens at the same time. Greer sent quarterly updates to the FAA and the Senate Committee. They were full of numbers that moved in the right direction. Some numbers did not. He did not hide those. He wrote backup plans. He asked for feedback like a student. He made calls to other airline CEOs and said the quiet part on purpose. If we do not do this together, we will do it alone. And alone is slower. Camille took one more walk through a terminal late at night before a red eye. Bins clattered. A janitor hummed and pushed a cart. The announcements sounded gentle at that hour, recorded voices moving through a mostly empty place. She stood near a window and looked at a sleeping aircraft at the gate. It looked like a long breath held. She touched the edge of the folio under her arm, thought of the first click of its zipper, thought of every small choice since. When she reached the door to the jet bridge, she paused and felt the weight of the day ahead. She felt the simple grace of a path where the next step is clear. She stepped forward, not into battle, but into work, not louder, only truer. She did not know the names of every one who would board behind her. She did not need to. She carried their possibility anyway. The sky is not neutral. It is a place we pass through together. Tonight, it would be a quiet crossing. Tomorrow, it would ask something harder of someone else. The point was never to end the questions. The point was to make the answers better. She walked on. Airports forget. People do not. Tonight, we watched a seat become a mirror. We saw how a single decision can carry the weight of history, how a calm voice can hold a line against a moving system, and how witnesses can turn a quiet aisle into a public promise. Doctor, Camille Rutherford did not shout. She named what happened. She asked for timelines, not favors. A captain chose to walk beside her. A passenger in a hoodie found his voice. An elder offered truth with grace. And an airline learned that apologies are not endpoints. They are doorways. Discrimination is not a headline. It is a daily harm. It hides in tone, in policy, in hurry. We condemn it here, without excuse, without footnotes. Dignity is not a perk. It is a right, and rights are defended together. Carry this forward. Record when you must. Speak when you can. Stand where it counts. Be gentle. Be firm. Be the person who keeps the door open one moment longer for the next traveler who is told to step back. If this story moved you, tap like to lift it. Share it so the next cabin is braver. Subscribe and stay with us. More voices are coming. More reckonings. More quiet victories. We will be here for the next flight, and the one after that.